Hi, I'm Elizabeth Roof at Vanderbilt University, and I'm going to talk with you a little bit about PWS behavior, kind of what we know, mental health issues, and give you some tips to deal with some of the issues that are pretty common in PWS. So that's what we'll be doing today. So some of the skills that you're going to need to work effectively with children with PWS are listening skills, being able to listen empathically, to be able to kind of hear what they have to say, being emotionally mature, not being reactive, not being upset with them. Again, they're kids, they have developmental delays, and being more mature than they are, having some level of patience, being able to kind of put yourself behind their needs, being able to be creative, thinking about novel ways to kind of solve problems, to do things, and to kind of think outside the box of what works for your kid. And also flexibility, being able to, again, not always get your needs met, to think of things in different ways, and also not to let other people's opinions of what would work for your kid always supersede your own knowledge of your kid. You know your kid better than anyone else, so it's really important to know that you have to be flexible and you have to kind of do what works. And the idea is if you do these things, you're going to develop trust and long-term relationships. When your kid with PWS trusts you, you're able to deal with more difficult situations when things don't go as planned. And also behaviors that can be pretty problematic will be better if they actually trust that you understand them, you accept them just where they are, and that you know what works with them. So those are some of the things that are really important skills to have for kids with PWS. This is true of adult children as well. So people talk a lot about the genetics of PWS and how much everything is predetermined, but parents are the biggest factor in positive outcomes of their child. This idea that somehow you're not important, that everything is driven by genetics. I hear people all the time who call me who say stuff like, well, you know, they have PWS. It's because of PWS. They do this because of PWS. Well, you know, I know hundreds of kids with PWS, and they're all different. They're all unique individuals. So the idea is that parents are a huge outcome factor in what goes on with your kid. It's not just PWS. So I think the most important thing you need to know is that you need to take care of you. You can better take care of your child if you're taking care of you. So the idea that you put your needs first, you sleep, you eat well, you exercise, you do things that you enjoy, you hang out with friends, you laugh, you do those things are really important because it's a marathon. And this idea that you don't have to take care of yourself and you're going to be able to best serve your kid as a parent just doesn't work. And I do have parents whose kids start to age that are literally falling apart because they've never thought about what they need to do to take care of themselves. So it's really imperative. And parents who cope well with stress and changes in schedules are a really good role model for kids with PWS. They don't like change. They don't like things being different. So the idea that you're able to cope with stress, schedule changes, things not going as planned is a really good role model for your kid to understand that this is what it looks like to cope well with change and to be able to kind of manage when things don't go the way you think they should. So how much control do you really have over your kid's behavior? Again, people talk so much about the genetics, but genetics is just one part of the equation here. So genetics is one part. Definitely kids with PWS are kind of wired to be a little more rigid, a little more intense. So kind of whatever kind of behavior or temperament qualities they have, they're just more likely to be a little bit more kind of intense and pronounced in people with PWS. Environment is another important factor. So, you know, what kinds of things are going on in their environment? Is there structure? Is there expectations? Is all these things, what part do they play? And then the third thing is parenting. Parenting is a really big part of this idea that you control, you set the stage, you problem solve, you come up with solutions instead of focusing on just the negative. And if you do those things, the parenting part can be huge because, again, it's this idea that you're working with the things that you've already been given. So for most people, once they get diagnosed, this idea that there's just so many worries, you read so many things on the internet, you hear so many things from your doctors, a lot of it, there's too much information, not enough information, this idea of what do you do next? And I think it's this idea of understanding that your kid has PWS, but that's one aspect of the kid. The idea that they have, you know, if they're willful or if they're, you know, have a lot of energy or if they're, you know, artistic, all those things are things that are part of them. So this idea is PWS is a part of it, but now when you get diagnosed, it's kind of what do you do next? And so for a lot of families, they really kind of struggle with that because the accepting is tough for them. So this idea that for us, it's like accepting where you are, This isn't what you prepared for. This isn't what you expected. And kids with PWS don't have a manual. So this is kind of a little cheat sheet manual for parents to be able to deal with some of the issues that are most common in PWS. It doesn't mean every kid will have them, but this idea that these are the things we see most frequently, and these are some of the strategies and solutions that work well. So some of the common behavior issues in kids with PWS are, there's definitely delays in understanding. They may not be able cognitively to always get things, what's happening, what's going to happen next. They don't always understand consequences. Motor skills are delayed, and speech is delayed. So often that they understand more than they can actually express. And so the thought is just because they can't express it doesn't mean they don't understand it. So, but there are delays across the board. Compliance issues are pretty big in PWS. Again, they want to do things their way, not necessarily your way. They can be pretty demanding, wanting things to be done a certain way, wanting people to kind of cater to their needs, and also being avoidant when they don't want to do things. So they can be really demanding in that way. Temper tantrums are pretty common, becoming extremely frustrated, very upset over minor changes, minor things that should be kind of manageable, can really set them off. Stubbornness, really getting stuck on things being a certain way, really being stuck on having the last word, those kinds of things are pretty common. As people get a little bit older and they're not really young kids, again, some of the emerging food issues happen. More hungry, more interested in food, more talking about food, more focused on when things are going to be served, how much, details about food, those things are pretty common. Sometimes we just see odd repetitive behaviors, questions where they ask things over and over and over, do things over and over, rubbing things, touching things, kind of stacking things up. So you sometimes see those repetitive behaviors. Sometimes there's even things like hand flapping and other kinds of things, picking the skin on their lip, picking the skin around their fingernails or on their lower arms, kind of things that are uncovered tend to be a magnet for people with PWS to skin pick. Other sensory seeking behaviors. They may hold things kind of outside of the edges of their eyes and look at them from an odd thing. They may smell things. They may want to touch things that are like curtains or unravel like upholstery or pillows or things like that. They have a lot of things that are pretty repetitive, but they seem to be seeking information, sensory information from the outside world. Sometimes they have emotional outbursts, becoming upset, temper tantrums, crying, throwing things. Again, those are all common things as far as that kind of emotional outburst. Also having real emotional lability, which means just kind of changeability. They're like the weather, 1 minute they're happy, then they're not happy and things like that. So this idea is that they tend to have a pretty rocky roller coaster ride when it comes to emotional stability and ability to kind of control their emotions. Shutting down is common. So if they become very upset, you may find that they kind of put themselves on the middle of the floor, on the stairs, kind of usually in your way. They'll lay in a heap. They can't be moved. You can't talk to them. They don't respond. Sometimes parents are concerned about those things. But again, it usually means that they're so upset at that point they're just not able to take in information. And if they are shutting down, there really is no reason to intervene physically or in any other way. It's just best to usually let them kind of go at that point. Aggression, biting, hitting, again, throwing things. Sometimes it's usually just because they're close to you. So again, knowing that if somebody touches them or is in their personal space. I had a young lady who pulled somebody's hair because the girl in front of her in line kept swishing her ponytail and hitting this girl in the face. So instead of, problem solving and thinking, I tell the teacher, I move away from her, instead she just grabbed the girl's ponytail and pulled it. So again, sometimes what's going on is a direct response to something that has happened to them, and they just don't know the better coping and problem solving. So we kind of help them do those things. Avoidant behaviors. Going to the bathroom. We'll find they sometimes spend, especially in school age kids or even older kids, they'll spend, 45 minutes in the bathroom avoiding an activity, something they don't like in school, an activity that maybe is not so much fun at work, those kinds of things. So realizing that if they're doing lots of things to not do things, sometimes that is the very reason that they're doing them. So again, we just have to be aware of what behavior it is and what is it doing for them. So perseveration. If I like it, I like to talk about it a lot. So you may find that they have a topic they talk about, a thing they talk about. It can be almost anything. So this idea is that they really have a kind of an endless loop when it comes to doing and saying the same thing over and over. They like to do things until they're done. We have people who come home from school. They're model citizens all day at school. They don't have any problems. They come home. They may flip through books, tear paper, Doesn't really matter what they're doing. They'll do something repetitive and for like a certain amount of time to kind of soothe themselves, smooth over kind of the day's events. And once they're done, they put it away and they're good. And again, they often can't move on unless they're done. So those are some of the really common perseveration things that we see. Some things that work are concrete reminders, again, finding ways to, give them a block of time where they can do something for a certain amount of time. If they're tearing paper, I used to have people who like to tear paper or do repetitive things. And if I was working on something, I'd say we would do this, and then you get 2 minutes to tear paper. It really helps them sometimes know that that thing is coming that soothes and smooths them. And so that is helpful. Visual and verbal reminders, sheets, charts, tally sheets, all those things are really helpful. And also natural transitions. People often underestimate how natural transitions of meals and going to school and catching the school bus or going to bed, all those things are really good transitions. I have a lot of people with compliance issues where they can't get them to do certain things. Natural transitions are a great way to get them to move on, because a lot of times they want to eat a meal. So if there's something they don't want to do, like put on their shoes or pack their book bag, that's a great time to actually put that in front of that thing they don't want to do. So anxiety in PWS is not always related to food. I think a lot of people think that if we fixed hyperphagia in PWS, they would not be anxious. We see kids who aren't especially hyperphagic, or maybe not any hyperphagic, and they're still anxious. So I think there's something about anxiety in PWS that's pretty common. Many kids with PWS feel anxious most of the time. There's a low level of it. And then when things get more out of control or not expectations met or schedules kind of go wonky, then you find that then it's when they kind of explode. But I think they're kind of like a pot that's on the stove that's always simmering. So they're never really off or cool. There's always a low level, which is why when they get upset, they're much more likely to kind of boil over. And again, anxiety in PWS is really diagnosed at a younger age. If there's a parent or family history of anxiety or depression, just know that that's superimposed on top of PWS. So again, if you're anxious or you have other children that are anxious or depressed, kids with PWS just feel it more intensely. Usually it manifests with lots of questions. I need to know why, what, how, when, and they basically just have constant need for reassurance. Even if they know something's going to happen, they often ask about meals, and parents will say, well, I mean, when have I not fed you? When have we not had breakfast? And it doesn't matter, right? It's this idea that need to be reassured. And sometimes it's that they don't like the answer. So they're going to keep asking until they get the answer that they want, and they will wear you down. Insistence on sameness. What we did yesterday and last week is exactly what I want every single time. So realizing that sameness for them is very important. But if we give them sameness, we also set them up for not being able to kind of comprehend and manage and accept when things aren't the same. So this idea that we do little baby steps are really important here. Also knowing that meltdowns when expectations aren't met. When they think something's going to happen a certain way and it doesn't, they often have meltdowns. For them, their expectations of things being a certain way are really ingrained in them, and they're really hard to manage when they're not. Again, shutting down, being completely non-responsive, and I tell people, when they're like that, there is nobody home. So talking to them, trying to reason with them, trying to do logic, or even better, when it's all over, trying to bring it all up again, just doesn't work. When they're shut down, there is nobody home, there is nobody to talk to, so you might as well just let it go and try to move on. Again, the quirky questions. People often say they respond to these things, and that they hope that what they say the right thing in the right way in the right tone of voice, their kid will finally get it and stop asking questions. The questions are to reassure them, but they can be just as compulsive a behavior as anything else. They don't stop, you have to. So this idea is that it may be really reassuring to answer the same question over and over, but again, you have to be the one to stop the interaction. And that is true of lovely strangers who your kid will, interrogate out in public. So this idea is that it's not helpful, and at that point, you need to intervene. They may ask a lot about schedules, about food, about other children. They sometimes have very intrusive questions, and also about people's pets. So this idea that they get stuck on a conversation or a topic, and the strategies to deal with them is, we always say, limit it to 3. 3 and you're done. Asked and answered, Your Honor. All those things help deal with some of the questions. Use verbal and visual cues. Again, hold up a finger, have a sign that they know that when they look at you, this is what it means. Help them to self-check. What is the answer to that question? When are we going to do that thing? And let them answer you. And again, know that you have to stop it. I'm always amazed when parents think that the kid with PWS is going to stop it. They won't. That's your job. They can't stop it. You have to. So as far as stubbornness goes, they often feel like they have to be right. They're so concerned with things being a certain way, has to be their way, and also have to get the last word. And I watch parents who have to get the last word with the kid with PWS. I always say it's like Survivor. They can out-stubborn, outwit, outlast you every day. So the idea that you always have to get the last word or be right generally does not work with them. So this idea that sometimes you let it go because you can move on a lot faster if you are not as stubborn as they are. Some of the strategies that work is give them two choices. We can do this or that. You can do this thing or that thing. And again, not too many choices because that's sometimes really hard for them to manage. But if you give them two choices, you give them a way to save face and a way to kind of dig out when they're getting stuck. It allows them to have some level of control. There's not much they get to have control over. What they eat is just determined by other people. How much they exercise, what can they eat, all those things when they go to bed are controlled by other people. So the idea is they want some level of control. It is okay to let them have control. It really doesn't matter what. I have kids that we see in studies, and when we're getting blood, they'll say, well, I don't want to have blood drawn. I could argue about having blood drawn, and we have to do it as part of the study. But what I do is I say, yeah, I said, do you want a purple top tube or a blue top tube? I like purple. What about you? Oh, I want blue. Well, great. Well, let's do blue first, and then we'll do purple next. We're not arguing about having blood drawn. We're arguing now about being able to kind of move forward, and I get their level of cooperation. Try to find a way to say yes. If they say, I'm ready to have lunch and it's 8:30 in the morning, I said, yeah, me too. But we have to wait till 12 because 12 is when we eat lunch here. That's okay to say that there's a way to say yes, and be a graceful winner and a loser. There is no reason to have the last word or make them feel stupid or that you're right or hash it out again when they're calm. All it does is make things worse. I've had teachers who've had a kid who's left the classroom or been suspended or had to leave for the day. And the very next day that kid walks in and they'll say, well, I sure hope we don't have the problems we had yesterday. Right, John? Well, let me assure you, they're going to have the same problems because you rubbed it in their face and you're already finding a way to bring it up again. So the way I look at it, you let it go. Oppositional behavior, very common. So they often need to say no before they can say yes, and they will want it that way every single time. So just know that if you do something and give in to something, they're going to want it that way every time. So in this case, it's really helpful to get cooperation. I need your help here. I need you to help me remember when to do this thing, or I need you to help me do this thing. Those things are really good for them. We need to get on shoes so we can go to the park to play. We need to do this so we can have breakfast. Get cooperation. I don't ever ask them questions about, I need you, can you put on your shoes? No. Can you take a shower? No. I just say, hey, it's time to get a shower so we can do whatever. So you always put the thing they don't want to do in front of something they do want to do. You get help from them. Again, compromising and not negotiation. They get something they want, I get something I want, and we don't negotiate, but we basically kind of say that if you can agree to this, this is what's going to happen. Know what you're willing to live with. This idea that people have these crazy ultimatums that we're never going to do this or you're going to be grounded to your 26 does not work with people with PWS. They do not understand questions, and the idea that you can kind of scare them straight does not work. So this idea is that you have to say things that you mean, you have to enact things that you're going to do, and you have to mean it every time. They need consistency. Aggressive behavior. When does it happen? We know that it's actually aggressive behavior is very much related to anxiety. So a little like a pressure cooker, they can only handle so much steam before they blow the top of everything off, and they have a kind of an aggressive behavior outburst. They may hit somebody, they may throw things, they may again melt down. A lot of times when it's over, it's over. So I tell people all the time, it is like your computer rebooting. When you can't figure out what it is, you call the IT people and they say, well, have you turned it off and turned it on? That's basically what they're doing. You're turning them off. And at that point, whenever they turn back on, you don't bring up all the things they did right before that. You just move on. So you have to read the cues. When they become agitated, they're pacing, you got to read the body cues. People often say that the aggressive behavior comes out of nowhere, but it does not. It comes out of somewhere. Validate feelings. It's not okay to excuse behavior. I tell people all the time, it's okay to be mad or frustrated. And as a parent, it's good to say, I can tell you're upset. I can tell you're mad. Everybody feels mad, but it's not okay to hit somebody, slap somebody, to throw their toy in the floor, and it's not okay to hurt other people. So validate feelings, but don't excuse behavior. I don't have direct eye contact. I do not look confrontational. I don't put my hands on my hips or fold my hands or my arms so I look mad and mean or threatening. I just go do something else. I literally, doodle on my paper or do something like that I need to do. And I don't look scared, but I don't confront them or look like I need to kind of like get in their face. Keep your voice and your face calm. Make sure that you and others aren't close to them, and don't try to touch them or physically intervene. At that point, there is no good side. You're going to get hit. Everybody's going to be upset. And again, giving them a safe place to calm down, a beanbag chair, place where they can't break anything or destroy anything, and make sure other people are safe. That means you might have a code word for your kids that you say, when I say this, everybody needs to go to their safe place, their bedroom, their wherever, so that we aren't giving this any attention. The more attention they get for these kinds of things, the more they do it. And having a plan before something happens is the best way. Prevention is the key here, not always kind of like having this storm that blows through your house and then it's all over. It really is about prevention, distracting, redirecting, all those things before things get out of control. So visual schedules and natural transitions are a really great way to get them to not be stuck. I'm going to show you some examples of how to use them effectively, but consistency is the key. If you do them for a day or a week, or you do them half the time for a day or a week, they don't work. You have to do them every time, and you have to kind of retrain yourself to think about it in that way. What works? How do we do it? How do we do it effectively? And how does every single person on the team do it? So if they're doing a task, it helps them to see, what are the steps? What does it look like? It helps them not to be stuck when they see what the next step is, what the next step is. You can use a sticker, you can use a dry erase marker, whatever you need to kind of mark off these things to make sure you've done something correctly. And it really does help them know when a task is done so that they can move on to the next one. Getting ready for school. What things do you need them to do? This idea for me is the idea that we put everything they need to do. I like to have a meal be the last thing so that that is a huge reinforcer for getting things done. And again, if they're, distracted or whatever else, then you can make it a race or, beat the clock. Or, if you get your sticker done, you have a little bit more time to eat your breakfast, whatever. Those are things that they can get because they're very concrete. So transitions for them are pretty tough. How do we make them easier? Timers are a great way. This idea that there's an objective way for them to know how long they have something, even giving them countdowns is good. Visual cues, verbal cues, the idea that something's going to change, something's going to happen, you need to be prepared. A heads up. This idea, a little change will do you good, be flexible, everything's going to be okay. Whatever you need to do for them to know that transition's coming. It's not the end of the world. It may feel stressful. It may make them feel anxious. But this idea that everybody needs to be part of the team. And again, don't get too used to a groove. Repetition and having structure that is so rigid is really hard because it makes them intolerant to change. I've seen more and more people as they grow up with PWS where no one has ever asked them to be flexible. So therefore, they don't allow anyone else to actually have any, they don't ever expect more out of themselves, and they expect everyone to kind of give in to them. So this idea that things are hard now and easy later, or easy now and hard later, you have to decide what it is you want and what's going to work for your family and your situation. It may be harder on the front end to kind of do these plans, to be problem solving, to be thinking about it, to do all these things that make your kid transition and less stubborn and less perseverative. Or you can give into them and realize as they get older, it's going to be harder and harder for them to be able to manage change and to manage other kinds of behavioral techniques. So things like getting dressed or ready for school. Your outlook is the most important thing. You're a salesperson. You're a flight attendant. Your job is to have a bright affect, to be confident, to be capable, and getting the best out of your child. If you look hesitant or frustrated or annoyed, they are going to do everything in their power to set you off. So this idea that they're slow, they're repetitive, they're not necessarily motivated is common for them. Your job is to not get stuck in that dynamic where you're letting them run the show. You're confident that you will get them to do what they need to do because that's what needs to happen. So low expressed emotion, thinking about your tone of voice, your affect, what your face looks like, and being calm. If you believe that they will, follow through and that they will do what you need them to do, they will believe. If you're hesitant or you give them reason to kind of confront you and you say, well, I know you're not going to do, put on your shoes. Well, they're going to do the self-fulfilling prophecy and not do that just to spite you. So my thought is I just try to act like it's all going to be great. And even when things start to derail, I don't focus on it. I don't talk about it. I just keep focusing on what I want them to do, not what I don't want them to do. So this idea that people negotiate and argue and bargain with their kids just generally does not work. You know, kids with PWS can manipulate you. So be clear about what your expectations are. I like to get them in writing if they can read, and have them sign an initial and date, like a legal document, so that they understand these are the expectations. This is what's going to happen. Do these before you go into a new situation, especially if it's going to be stressful. A holiday gathering, a party, out in public, those kinds of things. Do not do them on the fly, because at that point, your kid's upset, you're upset, nobody's going to be able to be reasonable here. Use calm and bright affect. If an argument starts, do not engage. Leave the situation, do what you need to do, but do not start arguing. At that point, the kid knows they've got you over a barrel and they will continue it on. And again, how can they control their emotions if you can't control yours? So the idea is that you got to be the bigger person, the better person, so that they see what that looks like day in and day out. And once they know they can't engage you or beat you down, a lot of times they could see you as a worthy opponent, and they will actually start to realize that you are going to make them do it. You're going to consistently follow whatever consequences. And for them, there's nothing to be gained in it, so they will comply much more frequently. So shutting down is common. What does it mean? Usually that they're overstimulated, they're frustrated, they're tired, they're too upset to give a response, or they're too angry. So when they are shut down, you are not going to get them to comply. So talking to them, reasoning to them, cajoling them, whatever you want to do is not going to work. So you want to anticipate problems and respond, not react to problems. So when you see they're starting to get tired or frustrated or overstimulated, do you take a break? Do you do something else? Do you change activities? Do you change person? Do you change the environment? What do you do to keep them from going down this track versus this idea that once they go down the track, they're going to crash at the end? So again, what helps? You can take a timeout. It doesn't have to be a timeout. Timeout sounds like punishment, but I'll say, you know, I need to take a timeout so I can cool down. I'm feeling pretty upset right now, so I'm going to go calm down. Go sit on the couch, do whatever you need to do. Don't talk to them. Don't interact with them. And again, realizing that you validate feelings and you move on. You don't keep bringing it up and acting like somehow this is a learning or teaching experience, because the reality is they learn from you doing it over and over consistently. They don't learn from insight or, oh, this is what you want me to do. They really learn from you doing it day in and day out and not bringing it up. Again, being proactive, not reactive. Sometimes behavioral approaches work with medications, especially ones that target compulsive behavior. SSRIs like Lexapro, like Celexa, can be really effective for people when you're trying to kind of move them from being so compulsive, so stuck, so rigid, and this idea that if you do that with medication, you can get the best out of them. Being connected socially, vocationally, recreationally. If they're not doing anything, then it's really hard to actually reinforce these things about getting along, being flexible, if there are no expectations. Also, things like applied behavior analysis can be a really effective way of taking things that are going on apart, kind of putting them in a different perspective and figuring out what is the behavior doing and how are we inadvertently often reinforcing it. If my kid has a problem at school, the school calls me, I pick him up, then we spend a good day together, we talk, we laugh, we maybe go do something fun. Well, I'm going to get that if I am really bad, you will come pick me up and it will be a really fun day with you. So again, if your kid is sent home from school from some aggressive behavior or whatever else, then it shouldn't be reinforcing from them. You pick them up, you don't talk with them, you don't bring it up. You say, because of this behavior, you're going to have to go to your room. You're not going to get any TV time. You have to go to bed early. Whatever has already been determined beforehand, and you make that happen and you consistently follow through. You do not give in. So what does work? Allowing them to calm down. Again, you're not going to talk them into it, but if you give them space, we often say, well, you're obviously upset. You need a few minutes to calm down. You just let me know when you're ready to get back to it. Letting them decide when they're ready to return to a situation makes it go so much faster. You cannot talk them into it. And again, you don't need to rehash or demand an apology. There's nothing worse to me than when somebody will make a kid with PWS apologize and it's like this, sorry, or it's nothing. And again, it becomes a whole big fight about demanding an apology. You want to return to balance and you don't have to be right. Being right means they have to be wrong, and that generally does not work. So problems commonly seen in PWS are things like attention problems, anxiety, depression, other mood disorders, aggressive behavior, and psychosis. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of these things in detail, and kind of what they look like in PWS and what kinds of things kind of work. So anxiety. We also often talk about how anxiety is pretty common, but also how much does it impact them? Often people will accommodate whatever they're anxious about and let them do it. So this idea, it doesn't distress them very often as much as it distresses the people around them having to do things a certain way. Some of the typical anxiety medications don't work very well in people with PWS. They can be highly addictive. So we're generally believers that SSRIs, antidepressants are way better to help anxiety than the typical anti-anxiety medications. Again, there's side effects with any medication often, and the long-term use we don't have a lot of data in. But for people who are that we're seeing over almost 20 some odd years with PWS, some of them have been on the same medication for a long time and have just made small dose increases, and it continues to work. For other people, they find that they may have to switch after they've been on medicine for a while because it just doesn't seem to be as effective. So monitoring, making a daily diary, what is it helping? What are the side effects? How things start? When do they happen? Looking for patterns is a great way to figure out, is this working? Is it not working? Do we need to do something else? Depression is definitely less common in PWS. It's about 8% of our sample that actually have what we would consider actual depression. But again, the symptoms are harder to determine in PWS. We have people that often have depression, but they aren't diagnosed. The behavioral changes may be much better than a self-report of like what people are feeling. They don't report feeling sad. They don't often report feeling guilty or low energy or anything like that. It really seems to be more you see differences in their behavior. And there are things like withdrawal, irritability, annoyance with others, tearful about pretty minor things, sleep issues. When they start sleeping a lot more or a lot less, that is a problem. So I tell people those are the behavioral symptoms we look for. And again, SSRIs in low doses seem to be really effective. And for some reason, way low, kind of subtherapeutic doses, we see most people do well on a drug if they start at a very low dose and make really small increases over time. And there are some subtype differences between deletion versus imprinting mutation versus UPD. So people with deletion can have depression as well. So can those with imprinting mutations and UPD. But for some of the ones with imprinting mutations and UPD, the depression, if left untreated, often turns into psychosis. So some of the other mood disorders we see, we're getting there's been a big influx of bipolar as a diagnosis. We do psychiatric interviews and don't see that as being a very common thing at all. In the US, it has become a big kind of catch-all phrase of people who have kind of unpredictable and, kind of mood that is kind of shifts from thing to thing pretty quickly. They consider that bipolar. But in Europe and other places, bipolar hasn't gone up. It's still around 5%, which is what it's been for years. In the US, it's up at 40%, which is way higher. And we don't think that a lot of people with PWS actually have bipolar. Some of the medications that work for bipolar are used in PWS, like mood stabilizers, Depakote, Lamictal sometimes. Other kinds of things are used. Newer versus older medicines, there's a lot more data on some of the older medicines, and they tend to be incredibly effective for people with PWS. So there are a few studies on certain things that we know that work, and my thought is it's better to use an older medicine that we have a track record with than a newer medicine that we don't know much about. Again, we know what the side effects are sometimes when they're older medicines, but it's really important to document things that are different, that change, and write it down, monitoring it. When do they take it? What do you notice? That kind of stuff. And again, self-administration of psych medicines is a really bad idea. Even if they feel like they could do it and you feel like they have the responsibility to do it. I've had more people with PWS who self-administer, who feel like they're getting better, and they will stop taking their medicine. They'll put it in the plant. They'll put it in the back of their drawer. And before you know it, they have a behavior or psychiatric issue because they're not taking their medicine as prescribed. So psychosis can happen for people with depression and people with PWS. Again, some people say 80 to 90% of all people with UPD have psychosis. We have much lower numbers across all of our groups. It's about 7%. And it is not limited to those with UPD. You can have a deletion and still have psychosis. And I want people to get that if you have a deletion, does not mean that you cannot be psychotic. And I've had more people overlooked because they don't have UPD. They can still have that. The common symptoms or psychosis are often overlooked. Withdrawn, confused, disheveled appearance. They look like their grooming is off. Their hair is not combed. They're not bathing. They're unable to carry out daily activities that they used to be able to. Changes in eating. They're eating less. They're sleeping less. Those are usually things that tell us that psychosis is either happening or it's about to happen. Having odd thoughts, paranoia, also people talking about them, looking at them, making comments about them, people threatening them. Those are some of the odd thoughts that we see with psychosis. So it's important for us to get that they happen and know that you can't fix it yourself. So you need to have an emergency plan. Safety first, everything else second. Where they go, how they do it. It is imperative that you think about their safety and what they need to do to be safe. So act quickly. Medications can be the cause. Sometimes psychosis is caused by medications that have adverse side effects. Think of everything that's different. Stresses or environmental changes, being out of school, new environment, new job, even good stressors can be stressful for them. Treatment is needed quickly. It does not get better on its own. So this idea that you can wait it out, do not do that. But prepare the staff if they go to a psychiatric hospital to be able to handle the food issues in PWS. And also medications work quickly in the right dose and type. So it's important to know that, if things would work quickly if it's the right kind of medicine. And just because you're better doesn't mean you should stop taking medicine. This idea that, oh, I'm not psychotic anymore, I should stop taking medicine. Sometimes the very reason they're not is because of the medicine. So taking it away is getting rid of a safety net that's going to have a huge issue when they have another stressor, and they're going to have stressors. So things that can make psychosis less likely: being socially engaged, things to do, things to look forward to, expectations, supports to meet them. Do they have a job? Do they volunteer? Are they doing sports? Are they whatever? Having jobs, school activities, physical activity is huge. They should not be sitting around all day. Do they want to? Absolutely. But should they? No. So doing things, any recreational, go for a walk, joining a baseball team, swim classes, any of those things can be really helpful. Things to look forward to. It doesn't have to be a huge thing, but little things they can look forward to, and knowing that family time needs some level of structure. So having all this downtime and unstructured time can be really stressful for them. So you're part of the team. Make it work. This idea that we're all part of the same team, we all want things to work out. We all have to realize that everybody has a part to play. And as a parent, you have a huge part to play. So if you go to see a provider and you're talking about your kid's psychiatric issues and things that you can do, realize it's not a vent session. Stay focused on your child. Don't make it about what people aren't doing to help. Have your child in the office the whole time. You need time to talk honestly, and if they're there, you're not going to be able to, because they're going to be defensive or argumentative. Don't get sidetracked onto other issues, or have a laundry list of complaints. You only have a limited amount of time. Don't be late. Don't be disorganized. I'm a big believer you write things down. If it can't fit on one page and it's too much to give them. Also, don't try to point out your kids' faults or get them to admit to them. It's a psychiatric issue. It's not an issue of a fault that somebody's going to admit to. It's an idea of a psychiatric diagnosis that needs some level of treatment. So bring a tip sheet about your child. What makes them unique? What do they like? What do they not like? When did these problems begin? What have you tried? What has helped? What has not helped? Tell about the issue in detail with precise terms, not freaking out, like, throwing a fit. What does it look like? Is there aggression? Do they hit people? Do they throw things? Do they pout? Do they cry? How long does it last? When does it happen? Look for patterns. Is it at school? Is it only at home? Is it only at grandma's house? Ask teachers and other people for input. Write it down. Don't rely on your memory. You're not going to remember. You're going to get sidetracked, and you're going to not be able to answer the questions that the person who's the provider needs you to. What medications have you tried? Did it have side effects? How long did they take it? Did they stop? People often do medicines more than once because they didn't write them down and didn't know that their kid had been on them before. And then they realize, oh, wait, we were on Prozac before, and that's right, it didn't work. Write it down, have a record. Know that initial visits will be longer, so make the best use of your time. Listen, but ask questions. If you don't understand things, it's important to know what it is the plan is, what the working diagnosis is, and what is the plan as far as medication. Having a friend to go with you, take notes, can also help the process. Sometimes it is overwhelming how much stuff kind of goes on in a doctor's office. So having somebody with you who is level-headed, who can take notes, who is not the parent, can also help. That's the end of my slideshow. I appreciate everybody for tuning into the webinar. And if you need any specific help of anything that I can help with, my email is elizabeth.roof, ROOF, @vanderbilt.edu, and I would be happy to help. Thank you.